Good morning, everybody, to the Istituto Affari Internazionali. My name is Ferdinando Nelli Feroci, and I'm the president of the Istituto. And I'm very pleased to welcome here this morning. IAI has organized this event, which is part of a series of events which are devoted to the problems and challenges of development. This meeting, among others, it's the witness of the interest that the IAI is attributing to the questions related to development. This meeting has also been organized with the support and collaboration of Focus 2020 and of the Compagnia di San Paolo di Torino, that I would like to thank for their support and collaboration. Today, the meeting, the conversation, will focus on two different aspects of that are both related to development. The first one is development within the G7 agenda under the Italian presidency, and we will hear in a moment a presentation by Marco Ricci, whom I'd like to thank, even though he's not with us because he's a bit late because of a problem of taxing, a very common problem in Rome, for those of you who are used to it. And later on, or no, before that, instead, with a little change in the program, Professor Isernia of the University of Siena will present the results of a poll which has been conducted by his institute, LAPS, based in Siena, together with other institutes, on attitude of European public opinions towards the issue of development. So I think that with these two presentations, there is going to be a lot of food for thought. If I may, I only have one comment, because I don't know what Marco Ricci will tell us about. I don't know even what Pierangelo Isernia will tell us about the result of the poll. I've seen some slides, but I don't want to anticipate them, of course. But I don't know what Marco Ricci will tell us about the development chapter within the G7 agenda. One thing I know is that G7 is an important forum, of course, because of the importance of its members and participants, but it is also a forum which has a very serious problem of representativeness. Because along the years, the importance, the relative weight of the members of the G7 has been drastically reduced. So if there is a task that G7 has to accomplish, in my view, a very personal opinion, is that of reducing the gap with the rest of the world that does not belong to the group of the seven most so-called most important countries. And in that respect, I think my own opinion is that, in fact, a chapter on development, on the challenges for development, should have a very important role within the agenda of G7, if the G7 want to reduce the distance with the rest of the world. Now, I will stop here, and I will give the floor, I think, to Daniele, who will assume directly to Pierangelo Isernia for the presentation of the results of the poll. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Ferdinando, and thank you very much for inviting me. As Ambassador Nelli Feroci anticipated, this is a sort of a continuation of a dialogue. We met already in December last year to present the Italian survey data, and this time we are enlarging the scope of our view, including France, Germany, and UK, thanks to the collaboration with the Dell Laboratory in UK. So the data I'm going to present will be about the four big European countries. As a matter of fact, as part of the survey, there should be also the US, but we kept it aside because, of course, it's on another league. I'm going to touch upon four main issues related to the level of concern of public opinion in these four countries for aid, whether they think that aid is effective to help countries and people elsewhere, where and who should should receive this aid, and then we will look a bit more into the beliefs about what is the role of aid, and we will see, this is often quoted as a typical posture of public opinion in Europe, a mile wide, an inch deep, to stress the fact that support in principle is very high, but in practice, people is not willing to do much about it. And we will conclude with the Italian case. Many of you, I presume, are Italians, so you will forgive me if I focus a bit on our country, because together with the survey, we did a set of focus group to dig a bit deeper into what the Italians really think about public opinion, about foreign aid, and we will see that there are some interesting results. Okay, so concern. You will not be surprised to know that when asked about what are the major concerns, people answer usually the economy, and secondly, climate change. There are some differences among countries. As an example, the Germans are more worried about the war and about migration than the Italians. This has been a systematic finding in the last 2 years. But in general, issues related to development countries are much less a priority for many of the Europeans in these 4 countries. Why it is so? Well, it's very hard to give an answer in 15 minutes, also because the question, does aid work? The answer is a typical university posture. It depends, so not really clear. But what we can say is that public opinion in these 4 countries is distributed in a very interesting way. This is the distribution of answer to the question whether the respondents think that aid is effective in helping the people that they are supposed to help. And you see here a trimodal distribution. Most of the people really is ambivalent about it. They locate themselves more or less in the middle. But there are 2 interesting extremes. On the one end, there is a certain number of people between 1/10 and 1/5 of the population that thinks that aid is not effective at all. And there is a much less wide minority, but still a minority that thinks that aid is very effective. So keep this distribution into consideration when we look at the other elements. We ask also in these first surveys what makes aid effective or non-effective in helping poor countries. And you see here the distribution of answer to a set of questions. What I want to stress in this, what we want to stress in this graph is, beside the percentages, is the ambivalence of people. There are majorities that at the same time think that aid is helping our own countries to have an influence in the world, that think that aid improves people's lives, but on the other hand, there are also substantial majorities that think that aid is basically useless. Why? Because it's spent in programs that do not help to reduce poverty, ends up in the pockets of corrupted politicians, and does not arrive at those who are supposed to receive it. And those beliefs are all in the same people at the same time, as we will see when we will be discussing the focus group data. So who should we help and how? We ask a set of questions about what aid should be for and what kind of areas should be prioritized. You see again here the trimodal distribution that we saw before. The majority of population think that in general aid should strike 2 main goals: help the countries that need it, reduce poverty, but at the same time promote our own country interest. And again, there are 2 poles at the extreme that think exactly in a polarized way, that think either that promote national interest is the main priority of aid, or vice versa, that reduce poverty in poor countries is the main priority. When it comes to the areas of intervention, we see that there is a certain amount of agreement with Italy spiking up in some of these items on issues like health, water, education, much less enthusiasm about helping in energy, infrastructure, and family planning. Italy, to a certain extent, is a bit of an outlier here, because as you can see from the green bar, that is Italy in this specific chart, you see that, as an example, Italian seems to put a lot of stress on helping third world countries in strengthening their own infrastructure and in welfare and economic growth. Now, said that, what is the support for increasing aid to less developed countries, and what we are ready to do to help them? Now, these are the facts. This is coming from the data that were released Thursday, I guess. And you see here that only Germany is meeting the threshold set by the UN. Both the United Kingdom, France, and of course Italy are far from hitting this target. And Italy, as you can see, is pretty low in reaching the threshold. Now, taking this into account, we asked what we should do in terms of aid. Should we give aid in a generous way, or should we rather use these resources for other purposes? Now, you see here that most of the population tend to think, in all countries, and in Italy in particular, that we should be generous in giving aid. So there is a general predisposition in all countries, Italy included, to do more. Incidentally, and I already joked about this in the past, my career as an academic started working on development cooperation, and the same results were relevant in the 80s. Italians were in principle much more supportive of helping other countries than the governments at that time were willing to do. Now, we also asked whether we should give more aid and we should increase the amount of aid. As you can see, the country that outlined itself as compared to the others is Italy, with 56% that thinks that we should give more money for overseas aid, and 37%, so almost more than 1/3 of the population, that we should increase the amount of money that is spent on overseas aid. And this puts Italy in a slightly different position as compared to other countries. You see that both in the United Kingdom, in Germany, and in France, there is some enthusiasm, but this does not go above 1/3 of the samples. Okay, so support for increasing aid apparently is not very popular in 3 of these 4 countries, while in Italy it looks like there is room for improvements. Of course, we can help in different ways, and one way of helping is doing ourselves something for the others. We ask what kind of personal commitment people had in helping other countries, less developed countries. What we see here is that while there is a substantial group of people that thinks that they themselves do not make any difference, there is certain amount of enthusiasm for helping the others personally, and Italy stands out as one in which this willingness is higher than others. I will say something about all this data at the end, but what I want to suggest here is that in general, population is ready to do something, either to keep them informed, although the level of knowledge about these kind of issues is very limited in all 4 countries, and Italy in particular. They are ready to talk about these issues, and Italy apparently stands out as one of which many people do so, and also to help concretely, giving money, sharing information, becoming members of association and organization that helps overseas aid. A last topic that we touch upon, because you might heard, those of you who are not Italians, that there is a certain ambivalence among both the public and the parties toward NGOs In the last few years, there's been a lot of polemics about the role of NGOs, especially in migration issues. So we ask a question whether they have a role to play. And what you find here, that apparently in most countries, Italy included, and especially in Italy, people think that NGOs can make a great difference in helping overseas aid. So the view of NGOs is not as poor as one could get, at least in Italy, reading newspapers or listening to politicians. And there is also a certain amount of trust for NGOs. Here you see a bipolar distribution. There is a group of people in all countries, Italy included, approximately 1/10, 1/5 of the population that thinks that they do not trust NGOs at all. But in general, there is a certain inclination to have a good opinion or a trustful opinion of NGOs. Now, said that, I anticipated that some room for Italy will be at the end, and here we are. You know this rhetorical myth, Italians, the good people. Reading the data, it might look, this is the case. Italy, again, is the green country. This is simply random choices by Excel, so it's not me putting Italy in green. But you see here that on each of these moral statements, Italy stands out as, in principle, very much in agreement with each of these statements. So as an example, 86% of the Italians think that every person in the world should be treated equally, while numbers are slightly less in the other three countries. Most Italians, 78%, look concerned about overseas aid and the situation, the predicament of poor people in other countries, while numbers are much lower in other countries. Apparently, 2/3 of the Italians feel guilty about the fact that we do not meet the needs of people in poor countries, while numbers are much lower in other countries. So, again, this willingness to help apparently is embedded in a moral vision in which we think we should do more. So far, so good. Yes, with some qualifications that I will tell you in a minute, because what we did, not surprised, but let's say curious about these results, we dig a bit deeper into them. And we did a couple of focus groups. Focus groups, of course, are not representative of the Italian population. They offer a snapshot of what people really think when they are exposed to these issues. And what we found are some interesting results that qualify and make us a bit more sober about what we have just seen. First, and this is not a surprise, people entertain very different views of what are the purposes of foreign aid. The statements that you find in brackets comes from the verbatim of the discussion with these people. So these are real Italians talking about these issues. And we see at least 4 different views of foreign aid. For some, foreign aid is an instrument of foreign policy. So has to be used in an instrumental way to promote Italian economic, military, political, strategic, whatever interests. Others, on the contrary, have a very altruistic view of aid. We should help others because this is the right thing to do, the moral view we saw before. For others, quite interestingly, and remember the focus group came at the end of a period in which conspiratorial views were rampant. COVID-19, this tells me that I have to stop. COVID-19 helped a lot to spread this kind of views. There are conspiratorial view of aid, meaning that we don't really know exactly what's going on in this field, and why should we be trustful about how the money is spent. And last, there is a very widespread view of Italians as a people that can't afford this kind of things. All this comes in a context in which, first, there is a dramatic, I would say, structural lack of information about what overseas development aid is. Just to give you a sense of it, at the beginning of one of the 2 focus groups, we realized very quickly that when we were thinking about aid to development, what these people was thinking was about aid to the development of Italy. So they were thinking spending money to help the Italians to become better, to be richer. Once clarified that, further barriers to entrance in terms of motivation to follow, to attend, to be careful to these issues is related to the fact that people does not trust when it comes to the details, does not trust so much what the government, what the NGOs, what the international organizations are doing. And apparently these barriers to entrance are difficult to overcome. This generalized distrust is quite widespread to be quickly overcome. On the other hand, there is some support for more aid, even when people is left to talk about these issues. But again, in the background, always looms largely the idea that Italy is a country that can't afford these kind of things. And when they are informed that we are one of the G7 countries, actually now we are the president of this team, they think, yes, but we are different because there is a lot of poverty in Italy too, and we can't afford this anyway. So the picture is mixed. Support in principle, openness to spend more, but a lot of hurdles to overcome in order to gain the support of the public on these topics. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a bit late.
Thanks, Pierangelo, for the presentation. We've been working together for quite some time now on this survey. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to Marco Ricci. Marco Ricci is the coordinator of G7, G20 activities within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Very busy week for him. This week there is the ministerial meeting on foreign affairs. So we really appreciate he took the time to be with us. So I'll give him the floor for his opening remarks, and then we can start the panel with the experts in the room.
Good morning to everyone. First of all, I'm sorry for being late, and I have also to give you the apologies of my Director General, which would have liked to be here, but unfortunately, this is a very hectic week, and also it's the week of the spring meetings in Washington, so you will have to to live with my presence. I'm the G7 and G20 coordinator in the Development Cooperation Director General, and I chair the PGII working group, which is the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, and I'm the deputy on all other sector of action that are under the development track. Italy decided to give development a prominent role in the G7 agenda. And this is proven by the fact that we will have a ministerial meeting. This was not the case last year during the Japanese presidency. We will have a ministerial meeting which will take, the ministerial meeting will be chaired by the minister himself, Honorable Tajani, and it will take place at the end of October, 24th and 25th. So this will give us enough time to work on several of the initiatives that we are right now undertaking. And the other very important appointment is the leaders' meeting, in which leaders will take stock of the work we will have done, that we are doing now, and that will be accomplished by middle of June, when the Leaders' Summit will take place. And then we will have the chance to get instruction, guidance to undertake other actions during the ministerial meeting in October. I would like to concentrate on the two main areas in which we are on the development track, which are food security and investments in infrastructure. Regarding, well, first of all, as you know, Africa is the priority of the Italian G7 presidency. So in all development tracks, we have involved since the beginning the African Union Commission, the Development Agency, NEPAD, and the African Development Bank. Regarding food security, why we decided to have food security very high on the agenda? Well, for several reasons. Italy has a long-standing tradition in this area. Let me remind you that in 2009, we launched the AFSI Food Security Initiative, which was Aquila Food Security, and it stands for Aquila Food Security Initiative during the G8, which was a platform very innovative because it was not only G8, but included other donor countries, many partner countries, international organizations, and for the first time, the private sector. Later on in 2021, we also had the Matera Declaration on Food Systems, and we played a very active role in that same year in preparing the World Food System Summit in July 2021. And last year, as you probably may recall, we hosted the stock-taking moment of the World Food System Summit in July at the FAO. Our intention is to launch another AFSI, which in Puglia, which will stand for Apulia Food System Initiative, and it will concentrate on two main areas, the nexus climate change and finance. On the nexus climate change, we will support the Technical Cooperation Collaborative, an instrument that was launched in COP28 and which recognized the link between the action that has to be undertaken regarding fighting climate change and supporting a sustainable food system. Another initiative we are going to support and is VAX, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soil, which is an initiative launched by the United States and supported by the African Union and the FAO, aiming at supporting climate-adapted nutritious crops and healthy soils. And finally, we will have a specific initiative on the coffee value chain. Maybe some Italian in the room may have read this in the newspaper, but it's an initiative that originates from the request of countries from Eastern Africa, where, because of rising temperature, deforestation, aging of existing crops, and depletion of soils, coffee culture run the risk of disappearing with catastrophic consequences on also on food security, but on the economic system of these countries. This is why we are discussing this item under the development track, but at the same time in strong coordination with the finance track and with the environment track, because of the implication it has. This is linked also to Piano Mattei, because the development cooperation will contribute to the realization of the Piano Mattei, and this initiative is the result also of the mission that our Director General undertook last month in 4 Eastern African countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And then there will be another leg of this mission, which will cover 4 Western African countries, Senegal, Guinea, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. So to listen to the request of these countries and propose some scalable initiative, in the sense that all these initiatives that we are working at, they are open to the participation of other member states, other states, international organizations, and especially the private sector. And this is also in line with the vision that was expressed to us by the African Union, in particular by Dr. Mayaki, which is the special envoy for the African Union for Food Systems. In the first meeting of the Food Security Working Group, he said that they are not asking for more ODA. They were just asking to help them to unblock the enormous capital which is available on the market by helping them to de-risk. De-risk is one key word. I will come back on this, on the finance and the infrastructure priorities. And the risk is what we are trying to work with, for example, in the working group on food security. We are working with FAO to develop a mechanism to support farmers in case of catastrophic extreme events involving also the private sector. This is something that is easier said than done because also the World Bank worked on this on a similar project a few years ago. But we think that this could be a very innovative instrument, and we are working on it. Even though, and we hope that some proposal will be ready for the summit. At the same time, coming back to Dr. Mayaki, he also said that he wanted us to help having a joint approach to the three different plans that the African Union has. The one in the CADEP, in the food system, the PIDA in the infrastructure, and the free trade agreement, because they are all part of a unique vision. And that's something that also he mentioned during the Italy-Africa summit in end of January, and we are also working towards this end. Another, in the finance sector of the working group on food security, we are working also to launch a coalition of public development banks, which is coordinated by on the Italian side by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. And finally, on debt for food swaps mechanism, this is something that Italy has some experience because it has already launched and put into practice this mechanism with Kenya and Egypt in a successful manner, if I may say. And we are hoping to involve other G7 countries to design and implement debt swaps with countries facing food insecurity. Now, a few words on infrastructure. As you probably know, in 2022, in Germany, it was launched this partnership on global infrastructure and investment, which is an initiative that aims to mobilize up to $600 billion both public and private, from G7 member countries by the end of 2027. Italy, and as well as the other European countries, members of the G7, that is Germany, France, plus the European Union Commission, participated at the beginning in this initiative with a project also included in the Global Gateway. And this is an issue that we are discussing under PGII because I mean, we cannot just replicate as European what the Global Gateway is doing. But to do this, we need to have a better structure, to give a better structure to PGII, because up till now it has just been a list of projects, but there is no mechanism to coordinate this initiative, and so far there has not been a common origination of the project. Each country contributes with its own specific project. This is why we are working to create a coordination mechanism, and also to give a better governance and to contribute with a common, a more coherent project origination. And on the same topic, on PGII, we are working also on de-risking by supporting a platform launched by the OECD at the request of the African Union, to collect and analyze disaggregated data regarding the countries of the African Union, which will make a specific request to be beneficiaries of this platform. This will help investors to have a clearer picture of the potential of investment in African countries, because we often talk about Africa, but Africa is composed by 54 countries, and in many of them, even though no one has investment grade, there are lots of opportunities in many countries and in many specific sectors in Africa. So we are supporting this initiative as Italy, also the European Union Commission, but we hope that other G7 countries can support it. Also in the PGII, we recreated an expert group which was established by the German presidency, then let's say suppressed during the Japanese presidency, but we now reinstitutionalize it to support us with expertise, but also with funds, because public development banks and DFIs of G7 members have a great opportunity, have a great chance to contribute with their financial support in launching originating projects and also contributing to scaling up projects in Africa. And finally, also in PGII, we make the decision to concentrate on sport, a neglected sector, but a sector in which there will be there has already been many investment in Africa. If we think about the Africa Football Cup in Ivory Coast and the previous one in Cameroon, in both countries there were over $1 billion of US dollar investment in infrastructure, which has also a very high social return, because we're talking about roads, hospitals, and also infrastructures like airports, hotel, which contribute to the sustainable development of this country. We want this investment to be sustainable. Not so many G7 countries have a focus on it, even though in the context of a Financing Common Summit, it was launched a coalition on sports and development, and Italy is co-chairing this coalition with the Istituto Credito Sportivo, which is a unique bank in the world, a public bank which finances sport infrastructure. And we hope that all G7 countries join this initiative, because Africa is the continent with the youngest population. Nearly half of the African population is under the age of 19, and with the perspective of doubling its size by 2050. And sports can play a very important role in a multidimensional way, at the same time contributing to sustainable development. I don't want to take much more of your time. These were the main area in which we are focusing on development track. And I will have to leave also early, because unfortunately the meetings are all day long. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Marco is also chairing was chairing the G20 Development Working Group, so he also has an extensive experience on that. And thanks for coming today. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniele Fattibene. I'm Associate Researcher at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, and I also coordinate the European Think Tanks Group. I'm very happy to have this panelist today in the room and also online. We have 2 panelists joining online. We also have 60 people connected on Zoom, so I encourage people online to include your comments or questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. I wanted to introduce you the panelists today. I'm very happy because with some of them we already had a few interactions in the past. I will start from our colleagues online, and I want to welcome Helke Ziele from the German Institute for Development Evaluation, DEVAL. Thank you for coming. And Dina Ashgadieva, who is connected from Japan, from the African Asian Development Bank Institute, who is working and has worked a lot with the T7 in the previous edition in 2023. And then next to me, I will start from Valeria Emmi. Valeria Emmi works for the Global Call of Action Against Poverty, but she's also chair of the C7. This event is co-organized by T7 and C7, two official engagement groups of the G7 presidency of Italy. And on my right, Paolo Morini. We met with Paolo last year. Paolo has been coordinating with the University College of London a huge research program, which was mentioned also by Professor Isernia, the Dell Engagement Labs. So welcome, Paolo. And then last but not least, on my left, Axel Berger from the German Institute for Development and Sustainability, IDOS from Bonn. Axel has been worked a lot on G7 and G20. IDOS has chaired the T7 in 2022 and is also playing a very active role within the T20. So I'm very happy that he's also found the time to travel to Italy to be with us today. I wanted to start from Paolo, and then I'll do a ping pong with our colleagues online. Paolo, as I said, has coordinated a huge research program on policy and public attitudes on development cooperation, and he also has a huge experience on how this data can be translated into policy actions by creating a strong dialogue with decision makers. So my question to Paolo, who has also a huge visibility and experience of the data from other G7 countries, would be, what is your experience in translating with the policymakers this knowledge and this data on development cooperation into policy action?
Thank you very much for the question, and hello everybody. It's nice to be here. My name betrays, I'm actually from Rome, but I've lived in London for 13 years now, so I've kind of lived across cultures for a bit. We've studied attitudes towards development and concern for global poverty for the grand part of the last 10 years. This project started in 2013. The most recent version is Development Engagement Lab that started in 2019. You've seen a lot of our questions presented by Professor Isernia before. Part of our effort, though, through the years has been to really understand how to draw practical implications from what you've seen. And truly one of our most robust findings are around the enduring public concerns for certain issues, including climate change, and the reality that people are concerned about issues around global poverty and global inequalities, and that these are driven by deeply held moral concerns, together with a realization that development aid comes with costs and benefits, and when the benefits outweigh the costs, people are more willing to support giving funding and resources to help address global inequalities. This is important in a sense for a series of reasons where I go to the practical in a sense, but we think of attitudes as these things that can be fleeting or perhaps very quickly changing. In this case, we know that actually people have deeply held beliefs about these issues, and they have very structured views about the way we approach poverty reduction worldwide. And this is really important. And one of these cases is the issue of climate change and sustainable development. We tracked through an entire pandemic because we started studying in 2019, and in none of the countries concern for climate change had decreased at all. So it's always been one of the three most important issues people are concerned about. This will really help you understand that when you're trying to approach these communications, people have enduring levels of support for addressing sustainability and global poverty reduction. On the issue of cost and benefit, you've seen what Professor Isernia has talked a lot about, is this idea that there's a real gap between the broadly held belief that poverty is bad and that we should address it, that we should feel guilty if we didn't do so, but the way in which we translate this moral ideal behind support for development aid can be more complicated. So our experimental evidence, our wealth of insights tell us that messaging becomes fundamental in activating these concerns within people. And the way we do it really matters, and the frame that we choose really do matter in the way people shape their support and engage with the issue. So morality is a really perfect example, because if you ask people, do you think reducing poverty is the right thing to do? Most people would be like, yes, of course, that's what we do. We're right people, we're good people. We want to try and address that. But there's a distance between what is the right thing to do and what we can afford, or what is the right thing to do in every moment. And there are specific cases that come with specific concerns. That's where messaging can really be effective at addressing public's incapacity to support concretely the idea of sustainable development and reduction in global poverty. So there's a few examples here that I could give. First of all, stressing out the morality point can be done in different ways. So using different moral arguments can tap into different kind of bases of values within people. So really getting to understand your audience and the point of view that they come from will mean that argument taking different kind of shapes. It can be absolute and universal and say we're all the same, we're all equal in the world, therefore nobody should suffer through poverty. But it could be more specific as to say we have a duty as citizens of a rich country or a richer country to redistribute part of our resources to countries that are less than us. Secondly, there is a relationship with this morality, which is kind of value-based and cost-benefits-based dimension of public support, which is really important. And increasingly, although people tend to think of these things as separate, so there is a kind of money argument and there's a value argument, our evidence is increasingly pointing to the fact that these things are connected together. So the change in moral views of the world will change the way you see the cost and benefits. And a change in the way you see the cost and benefits of aid can influence your view in moral sense of what it means to tackle global poverty worldwide. So this is a kind of challenge. Finally, on the cost, the importance of corruption cannot be understated. This is one of the most robust and relevant concerns across 6 countries that we studied through the years. Most people are willing to support aid, but have serious and severe concerns about the fact that this money does not reach the intended recipients. Okay? I think more than in other countries, this is true in a lot of NGO and charity experience, especially in Italy. I think of a lot of like emergency response even within Italy when earthquakes strike, and a lot of people are mistrusting of the fact that resources will actually get to those who need it the most. As an example, we studied public support for giving aid when it comes to Afghanistan and the withdrawal of the military forces recently. It will not surprise you to find out that most people were supportive of giving aid in the abstract, but then we said, should we give aid to Afghanistan now that the Taliban regime is back in power? And most people were withdrawing their support completely. But if you are able to address their concerns for corruption by saying we could rechannel aid through NGOs, we could work in partnership with civil society, that support can be rebuilt. So messaging really is the key to untackling and unshackling those kind of gaps between broader support and the specific and the capacity to deliver for people. Public support matters incredibly for governments that give aid, and more so in times like this in which the challenges are becoming so multidimensional and touching on multiple areas. Having the public on board is a constraint for policymakers, because if the public wants to deliver this, then the government are more likely to follow on the agenda and be, as we say in the survey, more generous with the resources they can allocate to this. I think this is a broader review, but I'll stick to that for now.
Thanks, Paolo. I wanted to give the floor now to Dina Ashgalieva. Dina has been coordinating a policy brief that will be presented within the T7, within a task force which is touching several topics, including development cooperation. She has an expertise on just energy transition. So my question to you, Dina, was also authored the study on the coping strategies of families during the COVID-19 pandemic. What is your view, and what is also the research that you're conducting on this, and what is also the linkage that you will have with the G7? I'm just reminding you that in 1 month from now, EI will also organize the T7 final conference, where the T7 declaration will be issued. So, Dina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. it was fascinating for me to listen to the presentation about this comparison of European countries towards their perception to overseas aid. So that's for me was interesting because I mainly focus on actually developing Asia, developing countries. I myself, coming from my origin is from developing Asia, and mainly focus on the, like you said, yeah, developing Asia. So my view on this actually, we did study, right, like you mentioned at ADBI on the, we did household survey in a few regions of developing Asia Pacific. And we studied particularly during the COVID was like coping strategies of households and also family businesses. How do they cope? And particularly that time, you know, financial aid was quite popular among countries because they had to provide help, something fast, urgently, quick. And there are some challenges which countries actually face. So this, I think, in the presentations was covered mainly. Should European Union give financial aid or not, like these topics. But in my study, I more focused on how financial aid, government financial aid was provided and what challenges we faced with providing financial aid. So actually, there are many challenges governments face. For example, having the database of eligible people who needs to receive financial aid and have it up to date, for example, when it's urgently needed, and then how to update this quickly. So some solutions, for example, countries came to, or like, for example, digital technologies, right? So they made people to declare themselves online that they need financial aid, but that has limitations as well. Solution is great, but then still it limits this access for people, for example, who don't have internet, who don't have computers, and maybe not even that literate to use, no digital literacy, for example, right? So then it's great solution, but then some people might not access it because of this problem. So how to keep this database, right, for people who need financial aid, then how to update it on time, and so to provide this aid, financial aid timely when people need it. So this is what we faced, I think, access, identification as well. Another result we found that actually financial aid was effective in helping families and family businesses. So those family businesses, for example, who received financial aid were more likely to do some coping strategies. So coping strategies, for example, like starting to sell online, doing some campaigns, starting, for example, delivery, and other things. So they could do, and those actually financial aid says it shows that those who receive financial aid were more likely to do these coping strategies during COVID-19. Yeah. So so this is just some of the findings. I don't know how much time you give me. So, but I want to conclude by saying that I think I myself from developing Asia. So developing financial aid is great, but another challenge like how to identify people who need it, how to provide it, and how to provide it effectively. So during COVID, for example, 19, the financial aid was unconditional, right? It was no condition because we needed to provide it fast. But sometimes financial aid could be also conditional. So actually, this COVID-19 provided great, opportunity to study effectiveness of financial aid, how it was used. So for family businesses, for example, I've always studied financial aid, but we don't know how people used it. Maybe they used it for something not related to their business, family business at all. So we didn't ask this question, and also the aid was provided unconditional. So we didn't have to report how it was used, how it was, like what we did do. Did we use it for a business, or it was just for food? We don't know. Yeah. So actually, this year, because COVID-19 was over, this year we started. We did last year. Sorry, we did new survey focusing more on food security and inflation. So how people are coping with food security. And interestingly, some of the responses came like, how do they cope with food insecurity? Top three answers came: first, reduce consumption expenditure; second, borrow from financial institutions; and third, borrow from friends and relatives. Yeah, so I don't know how much my time I have, so but I guess I conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. Maybe later we can also investigate more on the groups that you analyzed. I know you also have included a strong focus on gender, so we can also get back to that. I will come back to the room, and I wanted to give the floor to Valeria. Valeria is doing an impressive work with the C7, which will also host a summit very soon. C7 is including lots of civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations in cooperating and in setting a dialogue with the G7 presidency on development issues. We know that last week, as Professor Isernia said, that the ODA data, the preliminary data from the OECD were released by the OECD, and we know that the trends about Italy are not very positive, and we saw a decline comparing to last year after a few years of increase. So I wanted to ask Valeria to give her perspective, both as C7, but also as an activist and member of an important CSO. What are the trends that you see on development? We have seen that development is an agenda, is a policy agenda within the G7 presidency of Italy, but what is your view from also the observatory that you have with the C7?
Thanks a lot, Daniele. Thanks to YAI and Focus 2030 for having me, and also for all of the inputs you gave us, a level of some substance and nuances, which is truly interesting and also indispensable to move also the agenda, the policy agenda, and the dialogue with the G7 countries and our stakeholders. As you mentioned, I'm here on behalf of and representing 700 organizations collected who are working together from more than 70 countries, exactly to build on the dialogue with the G7 and also G20 SA countries, because of course the interconnections are there. And also by hearing from Marco Ricci, and also because of the dialogue we are having with our institutions and the impressive data we have heard today, I would like just to tackle three main elements that I think clearly represent the approach and also the demand of civil society in the G7 context, but let's say also in the international global context, because the main element the civil society organization are bringing also into the dialogue with the G7 countries, the G20 countries, is the fact that G7 can play an useful role to solicit and bringing and finding a consensus to move the agenda for sustainable development and reach the development goals in the 2030 agenda. So the G7 can just solicit a process by working together and by reaffirming a strong solidarity. And this is the first point. We need a strong international solidarity, exactly because we are experiencing an unprecedented world with a lot of crises, interconnected crises. We call it a polycrisis, which is of course not new. It didn't come out of the blue, but is exactly the result of specific approach which emphasized actually the inequalities. So we need to reaffirm a clear role of a collective work exactly to promote systemic and transformative revisions in the agenda. Business as usual is not an option anymore. So this is the call for G7, but for all of the countries, exactly in promoting systemic, transformative, and generative changes in international policies. And it requires a policy coherence. Of course, what is happening here, we know has an impact elsewhere. So we need to act globally, and we need the G7 also act with a clear understanding of these interconnections. So by overcoming the personal and the country interest, exactly because the crises are affecting all of the people globally. So the global challenges, this is the main element we are bringing to the table, require common resolve and exactly a strong international solidarity. These open and pave the way for the second element I would like to bring to the discussion, which is the global international financial architecture reform. So exactly because of the situation we are facing, we need to make this reform real. And in this call, the debt release is essential. Civil 7 is being vocal for debt relief because we have still 60 countries are high debt risk, while debt service burdens are historically at levels for the majority of the global south. So if we talk about a partnership with the global south, with the African continent, which is a priority, of course, of the G7 presidency, Italian presidency, we need to bear in mind that the debt issue is an issue to be tackled in a comprehensive and urgent approach and level. So the international debt architecture we know has proven inadequate, and the global debt relief initiatives have failed. And one of the call we are bringing is exactly to support a prompt debt cancellation. We are pretty much aware of the fact that there are a lot of structural and technical issues, and also the engagement of the public and private sector in this issue is essential. But we need to support this debt cancellation in a urgent way. And also in the current tight fiscal spaces in low middle income countries, and there's an unfavorable international financial context, scaling up to concessional finance for low and middle income countries is essential, and will be essential also to address the compounding crisis we mentioned, which means support, for instance, new SDRs allocation with fresh and new resources to enable exactly the unconditional access to liquidity to invest in SDGs. Once again, the promotion of the 2030 agenda, which means also climate response, food response, migration response, gender equality response, and all of the policy issues exactly interrelated. This should happen without increasing the debt burden, of course. So also when you talk about climate swaps or food swaps, we need to avoid promoting them as a solution to the current debt and climate or food crisis. This is another element really critical for civil society. And coming to the ODA, of course, we need to recommit to the 0.7% ODA target and agree on a clear timeline to reach this target, but also, as it's not mandatory, it's just a choice of investment and how to address and invest the different resources. The proposal is to tackle this issue with a long-term perspective, which means, for instance, add resources and also find innovative solution, innovative sources of funding, such as an international solidarity taxes, for instance, including financial transactional taxes. There is, of course, an open debate on that, but once again, we are facing crisis, but we need to tackle the root causes of this crisis with a long-term perspective and with long-lasting policies. And then, and I'm concluding, the last, but I'd say most important thing to be addressed is the global agenda for peace, which need to be a priority. We are facing today this level of crisis with an increasing level of wars, conflicts, which are affecting a lot of people. And we need for the G7, but I say also at global level, to find common solution to build peace. This is key. I mean, this is the most relevant thing exactly to move towards development and once again move towards the sustainable development and 2030 agenda. And it means that, of course, we need to reaffirm that diplomacy is the only solution for current wars, but bridge the gap between conflicts resolution and long-term peace building is essential. So we need to find strategies addressing structural challenges. Once again, structural challenges and the root causes at the basis of conflict. And it needs investment in people-to-people cooperation and networking between civil society across borders, reaching grassroots level civil society, involving grassroots peace builders in peace building activities. This is one of the main recommendations we made, for instance, in the statement we have just released yesterday ahead of the G7 foreign ministers meeting, because of the current scaring situation we are facing in MENA region, in Gaza, but also because of the increasing level of crisis and wars we are facing globally. And the last thing is that civil society is ready to work together to bring the different perspectives to the table of the policy decision makers, because we have experience at global and local level. And that's why in the continuing dialogue in this space, the G7, through an official engagement group, which is the Civil 7, we are bringing all of the elements and the different perspectives we have in our daily work, exactly to move forward and to build on a sustainable, more sustainable and peace world. Over.
Thank you, Valeria. Your group is much larger probably than the T7, so I guess the coordination is a little bit complicated, but thank you for bringing these points to the discussion. I want to give the floor now to Helge, back to the virtual panel. Helge and his team has worked on a very interesting midterm review of the 2030 agenda, which was published very recently. So they also analyzed public attitudes towards the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. So I wanted to ask Helge, what are the findings of your survey? What are also your views looking at a country like Germany, where we see also worrisome trends in terms of support of key areas where development cooperation has an impact? I'm thinking about migration, but not just that. So the floor is yours, and really interesting to hear your findings on this review.
Thank you very much, Diana, for the invitation and the kind introduction. As you mentioned, so I'm at the German Institute for Development Evaluation, working on the opinion monitor for development politics, where we study public attitudes and opinion on development cooperation since 2017. And one topic that we repeatedly looked at, that I'm going to talk about today, are public attitudes on the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And we have published the first piece on that already in 2018. And now, using the data from our friends at the Development Engagement Lab, we just published another piece on that earlier this year. And to give a bit of background, so in the first report, we asked people in Germany in 2017, so just 2 years after the adoption of the Agenda 2030, whether they knew the SDGs. And it turned out only few Germans had heard of them, and even fewer knew what the SDGs actually are. We also found that Germans already back then were on average not really optimistic about that the SDGs could be achieved until 2030. So now we have 2024, we've already crossed the midpoint of the Agenda 2030 with only 6 more years to go. The 2023 UN report last year sent an alarming signal that we are off track for achieving the goals. And this was a motivation to us to repeat this study and ask the population again, the German population, about the SDGs and their achievability. Well, and the somewhat disappointing result is that the awareness of the SDGs basically remains unchanged since 2015. You can see a little fluctuation, but basically the pattern is the same in 2023 as it was in 2015. So if we look at the very right bar, the 2023 bar, and look at the top 2 categories, it's around 30% of respondents in Germany that have heard of the SDGs, of which only 9% knew what they actually are. Around 2/3 of the respondents, which is the light blue bar, have not heard of the SDGs at all. To give a little comparison with the data from Italy that you guys worked on, in Italy 16% know the SDGs and another 42 have at least heard of them. So it's twice as much as in Germany. The second and maybe a bit more alarming result, in my opinion, is about the achievability of the goals. So as said before, already in 2017, Germans were rather skeptical about the achievability of the SDGs. The blue dots here in the middle show that for all the 17 goals, Germans were in 2017 would rather disagree than agree that the goals can be achieved by 2030. And now in 23, as you can see with the orange dots, Germans became even more skeptical. So for each of the 17 goals, the respondents believe less that the SDGs can be achieved until 2030. There are probably different factors at play. I think one important is that people are probably aware that we are off track in achieving the SDGs in certain areas especially, and that certain events such as the war against Ukraine or other international crises further set us back. And second, people are probably also aware that it's only 6 years left and especially such big goals as SDG 1, no poverty, which scores at the very bottom here, are probably very hard to achieve in only 6 years remaining. And finally, we asked the respondents whether they think they can play an active role themselves in achieving the different goals. And here again, we see a reduction compared to 2017 for all the 17 goals. There are some differences, so like in goals that are more assessed to, more related to consumption or environmental protection, so a bit closer perhaps to the everyday life of people. The perception is a bit more positive, but overall for most of the goals, people in Germany rather disagree that they can play an active role here. Last, I want to give a small outlook on public attitudes on development cooperation in general in Germany, not only about the SDGs. As many of you have probably heard at some point, Germany is facing, or German development cooperation is facing some sort of legitimacy crisis. At least that's what it was titled by some development makers. So in the past 6 months, there has been a lot of attention on development cooperation, which is rather unusual. But unfortunately, most of this attention was negative. So certain political groups, public groups, media outlets attacked development cooperation, certain programs and spendings, as well as development cooperation as a whole were questioned. I believe most of you have maybe heard of the now famous bicycle lanes in Peru or the gender trainings in China, which were basically the points sparking this whole debate in Germany. In the light of that, how is German development cooperation or attitudes on development cooperation evolving at the moment? So our next report, the Opinion Monitor 2024, is not yet published, but it will be released later this year. But our preliminary results already show that support for the development cooperation, and especially for development cooperation spending in Germany, is decreasing. And this trend had started more or less 2 years ago, but now in the last half year have gained momentum. And the second, and again, this is a preliminary result, but our analysis suggests that there's a link between economic downturn and decreasing development cooperation. And that, of course, given the energy crisis and the inflation that we have seen in the last 2 years following the attack on Ukraine, given that this support is very worrisome, as there's the risk that the very broad public support Germany has seen in the past is actually under threat now. And I think with that I want to finish here with my input. The results on the Agenda 2030 policy brief can be found on our website, as well as all the other publications. They're all available in English, so feel free to read them if you're interested, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Helge. Thank you so much. We met with your team last year in a conference organized by also Paolo, where we had the chance also to exchange on this, I would say, a little bit gloomy results, but they tell us a lot, especially in light of the Summit of the Future in September, how strong the efforts we need to make to increase the level of knowledge, the level of support, because if big countries like Germany, which as Professor Isernia showed are among the few reaching the target of 0.7, we really need to work together to increase this and to face this legitimacy crisis. Last but not least, I wanted to give the floor to Axel Berger. Axel has worked and is working a lot with IDOS within the T7, also in cooperation with YAI. IDOS is chairing one of the task forces on development, and is also steering the work on the policy briefs that will be presented next month in Rome. But he is, as I said at the beginning, he also has an overview of the work that the G20 and the T20 are doing on development. So I wanted to give you a little time to elaborate on what IDOS is also working on this particular feed? Where is the state of discussion on, and also what is your connection with the G7, the G20 on key topics linked with development cooperation like energy and climate goals? So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniele and EIE, for bringing us together and bringing me to Rome. It's a really great pleasure, and our two institutes have been collaborating quite substantively over the years, in particular in the ETTG context, also the European Think Tanks Group, and the G7 and G20 context. So what I would like to do is to first talk a little bit substantively on the issue of climate finance that you have raised, but then also touch upon a little bit about the role of think tanks in the G7 and the G20 context. So on climate finance, and I'm kind of picking up where you have left, Valeria. On climate finance, I think it's important to stress that the G7 is committed. That's the good thing, because the gap is huge, right, in terms of financing for climate action, financing for SDG action. The gap has been calculated to be 2.5 trillion before the pandemic. It's now calculated to be at 3.7 trillion, so it's a huge gap. G7 committed to increase climate finance, in particular for adaptation and resilience at the Carbon Space Summit in 2021. So more money for good things, but the G7 also committed to spend less money on bad things. So to phase out new direct government support for international carbon-intensive fossil fuel energy, and also to commit to in general, phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And it's committed to invest in quality infrastructure, something we heard already. Commitment is good, but obviously what we need is action. And I would like to touch upon very quickly 6 points where I would think that the G7 plays a crucial role and where it should do more. First thing, obviously, follow up on previous commitments, right? That's important in itself, but it's also important in terms of rebuilding trust in a geopolitically more difficult, more challenging environment. So that's very important. Follow up on what you have promised. The second thing, a second suggestion from my side is support for MDB reform. I think we have made very good progress, in particular with regard to the World Bank, with regard to its mandate, with regard to its lending capacity. That needs to be followed up, but there are more proposals on the table. David McNair collected 71 proposals. So it's a very dynamic policy debate, which is very good, obviously, because there is movement, there is action, but there's also obviously the question of coordinating and prioritizing and knowing where to spend political capital. So there's a role for the G7 in order to prioritize and put a strong focus on MDB reform. Obviously, the big elephant in the room, which you have already introduced, is debt relief. I think that's key. The IMF calculated that there are 39 developing countries which are in or near debt distress, and obviously having such a difficult situation prevents you from using the money you have on climate financing, on SDG financing, that it's becoming nearly impossible for those countries. And the G20 common framework is inadequate, which you have also already highlighted. It excludes a middle-income country. It lacks incentives to bring all actors to the table, in particular private creditors. It's working on a case-by-case approach, so not the ideal structure you would like to have. So we need comprehensive initiative, I would very much agree with you, which brings together also private actors, which also addresses which also involves the MDBs, because for 27 over-indebted countries, more than 50% of their debt stock is owed to MDB, so they need to be involved as well, which may also solve one of the contentious issues we have in negotiations with China. And then, obviously, it's needed to link debt relief to financing climate-resilient development, right? So increase the fiscal space, but then also use it to focus on climate-resilient development. International climate finance will not be enough. We need to do more in order to strengthen the local capital markets, right? Because most of the savings in LMICs in low and middle income countries is actually invested abroad in safe havens, but with a very, very low return on these investments. So the challenge will be to use these savings more domestically, and here the public development banks play a key role. So the G7 also has a role in order to strengthen capacities, providing capitals, providing guarantees. Then obviously using the special drawing rights is another key topic that I would also like to mention and re-emphasize. So create not only new SDRs, but also use the SDRs that high-income countries have received as well, and on-lend them and increasing the firepower for multilateral development banks. Again, the G7 plays a key role in order to create a dialogue among the G7 members, because the political positions are very far apart. I mean, I'm coming from a country which is very conservative on that point, but there are other G7 countries like France which are a little bit more innovative in order to use the SDRs. Then one last very technical but very important point is to better align the development and the climate finance areas, in particular with regard to reporting. I mean, we do not have a common definition for climate financing. Most of the climate financing is done through ODA. But obviously there are mismatches in terms of the rationales, in particular with regard to climate change mitigation finance. There's an overcommitting and overcoding. So there's a real need in order to reform the DAC system on climate financing. And there's a chance in order to reform that system by better aligning to what is discussed in the context of the climate system. They are negotiating a new collective quantifier goal, and the OECD DAC should align their system to these discussions. Do you want me also to touch upon think tanks, or shall we discuss that in the? Yes. Okay, very quickly. What's the role of think tanks? I think one important aspect is to inform about global concerns at home. I think that links very well to the debate we had earlier about perceptions and support for development cooperation. That's a key role for think tanks, right? Not only discussing global concerns globally in the Think 7, in the Think 20, but also to try to influence public opinions at home in terms of these global concerns. Then obviously providing analysis, synthesizing research results, and then creating policy recommendations on that basis. Fostering policy dialogue among think tanks that are often linked to government, but also then obviously involving policymakers. And then one last topic I would like to mention is that think tanks like EIE, like IDOS, like others, they often engage in the T7 and the T20, so it's really important in particular with regard to this increasingly challenging geopolitical environment to build the bridges between the G7 and the G20, and think tanks can play a role, an important role here.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you so much for this. I think the issue of informing domestically is a key element, and we're all struggling with that from different perspectives and different angles. We have more or less 25 minutes, so I invite people in the room and online using the Q&A tool to interact. I don't know if we already have questions from the room. We have a microphone going around the room, so we can collect questions or comments in the room, and then maybe I can also address a question to the speakers. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Vasco Molini, World Bank. I work for the 50 by 2030 to provide agriculture. So, two things that I find related. So, the concern on risk investment and the concern of having European and Western countries, public opinion made aware of the challenges of development. All revolve around availability of data and transparency. So we have SDGs, for example. One of the scopes behind SDG was precisely to also make the European Western public opinion aware of the challenges and how to track the evolution of development. The problem is that we hardly have data to track the SDGs. So if you go to whatever country in Africa, I mean, I'm working on this because with our initiative, we provide information, for example, human food and all this stuff. We don't have functioning national statistical system that can provide this information. So, I understand it's a catch-22 in the sense we have the SDG on one side, and on the other side, we don't have systems, to track them. So, we need to do something, and I would like to hear your opinion about an effort from G7 on the data, which is an hard sell, I agree, with all the problems and data probably. But if we really want to achieve some of the things all of you mentioned, I think investment in data information in the countries is fine. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we already have a question for the panelists, and I think we have well-suited candidates to reply to that. I will start with Paolo. So what is your view on, how data are important, but sometimes they're not available, they're not necessarily transparent, but at the same time, even when you have data, the support internally is not necessarily evident. You have been working on this for years, so what is your view on that?
I can speak less about the importance of data reporting on the achievability of the goals. Although, anecdotally, I think this is a real difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. I grew up literally at the time in which the MDGs were being developed, and I remember looking through the reports as part of my education in school. So that kind of global civic education mindset, for some reason, it didn't really transpire, as much as the difference between the MDGs and the SDGs has not become clear for people. But I think you highlight a real challenge here, and it's part of what our representatives from Germany were talking about as well. People have no real evidence-based area in which they understand development. We're still, to a large extent, in a lot of the net donor countries, stuck in the 2000s and around the time of Live 8. So that's what people are thinking about. So there's two challenges there. There's the technicality of what we're trying to put forward, and it's very tough to go to publics in net donor countries and be like, what do you think about de-risking, and hope for a reasonably structured answer. But at the same time, people can be brought on board, and kind of perspectives can be checked and engaged with, and people are willing to receive evidence to kind of unshackle those preconceptions that they have around the way development works. It's really, really important, especially like my example will be a lot lower than thinking about reporting on SDGs. But when we ask people how much do you think countries give to development assistance, people estimate it to be around 20 to 30% of the budget. So that's how far off public understanding of these processes are. I wouldn't even imagine it's particularly different when it comes to SDGs achievability. And we have some data on this, and they're available on developmentcompass.org, which is our website in which we ask people, do you think we're nearly there? Or do you think we're far off? And most of the time, really, it does not reflect the reality of what's changed. If I were to point to one of the most fundamental kind of results of the last 10 years of development cooperation is the difference between Asian development and African development. And I think even that is not purely transcribed. That brings me to the world of like stereotypes and the importance that campaigns have in addressing that. So if on one side is a world of data, on the other side it's a world of language as well. So if we do not engage on both sides, A, with evidence, but B, by saying, you keep thinking about this as a problem that has not changed substantially, but as you were saying, we live in a world of polycrisis. What development does now is so substantially different, even though the challenges it seeks to tackle are the same, but the way we need to address them has to change substantially. The combined effect of data, evidence, and language can deliver that, and people can be brought on board. There was a time in which Make Poverty History call was to drop the debt. So we managed to engage publics on specifics, on technical stuff. Are we doing it as well? Our data says no. Most of the people do not know what the SDGs are. In Germany and in France, awareness might be higher, but again, more and more we're convinced that part of this is because they're thinking about development as a thing that is different from what development really is. And in Germany, they misunderstand internal domestic funds for redevelopment from global development. And in France, I think the issue was that they heard about sustainability and they think, oh, that's what we're talking about. Yes, in part, but not all of that. So it really is a real question. I'll be polemical and I'll close like this. Is it fundamental in a world in which people are moved a real sense of moral obligation to do things, that they know exactly the technical state of things? It might be for some people, and it might be important to build robust engagement, so sustained engagement from the public, but to put a foot in the door and bring people on board, the simpler argument might be sufficient. But this is more a question mark and a provocation than a real point of evidence.
Thanks, Paolo. Before going to the other panelists, there is another question in the room.
Thank you. Short comments regarding the data and the survey presented by Professor Isernia, because I think that we have to change our narrative altogether, I mean, because it's clear, like Paolo Morini said, if you ask, are you in favor of the reducing poverty? Okay, I am in favor. But the challenge is that we have to add a sort of different public awareness, because this means the common responsibility through a good mix between principles and reality. And this is credible through accountability. For instance, after 50 years, because the promise is 1970, 0.7 on 70, as you prefer, it's enough. The policy coherence means from the fact, from the promises to the fact. If after 50 years the international community, according to the last OECD data, passed from the 0.36 to 0.37 in 2024, this means the lack of credibility. Or last mention about finance, climate finance. According to the Oxfam report, the Shadow Oxfam report, looking at the $100 billion for the loss and damage fund, if I discovered, like citizen, that of these $100 billion, only 83 were really available. Of these 83, only 25 really channeled to concrete action for adaptation and mitigation, there is a lack of credibility from the citizens. So the pandemic showed clearly that we are all together in the same ship, in different conditions. So this is the common responsibility and the bridging between promises, action, and fact. This is the real topic. No solidarity against skeptical people, but coherence between fact, the challenge we are facing, and a lot of crisis factors, because we have the evidence after pandemic, thinking to pandemic, that we have to change our approach. This is a sort of input, but I mean, for all of you, as you prefer.
Thank you, Francesco. Now I want to ask, we have more or less 10 minutes, so I ask panelists to be short, like 2-3 minutes in their answers. Dina, you have also heard about, the importance of data, but also the lack of knowledge, and you have a great expertise also working with community groups, with your studies and with your institute. What is your perspective on this? How hard it is to, inform people, to raise awareness, also on key issues like gender empowerment, on which have been working extensively. What is your view, and what is the role that think tanks like yours can play in this regard?
Thank you very much for excellent question. Yeah, in fact, recently, last year, I did a study on household survey on awareness, availability of information about, for example, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, such issues. Interestingly, that awareness is great, it's quite high, yeah, and people receive information, they report, especially from TV, so access of information was greater than I expected, and people were aware, but of course, simply awareness cannot help with energy transition. So a part of awareness, we also need ability, right? So first we need to want to change, and secondly, we need to be able to change, right? So awareness is just changing their willingness. Do they want to change or not? But then when it comes to ability, that's of course income, and what you mentioned, even gender, like woman empowerment, these things coming to the question, yeah. So a part of about gender empowerment, yeah, so there is, of course, great difference across gender. And this topic is very complicated. There is no clear answer. So it's interesting, some studies say that women are more energy efficient. Some studies also opposite, they consume more energy. Then also some studies show that women can drive energy transition to cleaner fuels, and some don't show that. So this is a very complicated question about the role of gender, for example, just energy transition. But definitely, what I would say that what's clear for me that women are more vulnerable to, for example, when they spend more time indoors cooking and heating using, let's say, coal or wood, of course, they are more exposed to indoor air pollution, for example. Yeah, so these things, I think everyone would agree for developing Asia, when women spend more time indoors for cooking and heating and using, say, coal or wood. Yeah, so that's things. And so what you mentioned about think tanks, so one thing what we always needed is evidence, right? So we need evidence-based policy recommendations, and usually data from developing countries usually scarce and then need to be collected. So I'm very glad that at ADBI every year I do this household survey. We do with my colleagues. We cover 17 countries, 10 countries from the region called South Central Asia, Caucasus as well, plus Mongolia, and also from Southeast Asia. And although some regions might think similar, but there are great differences across countries, even across provinces. So it's very interesting what data can tell us, and then so I think it's important, this data availability, data collection, so in order to provide evidence-based policy recommendations.
Thank you, Dina. Valeria, in the room, people said promises need to be accompanied by facts. In 1 month from now, you will host the C7 summit. what would be, from your network, the main promise or the main fact where you expect the G7 leaders to deliver on development? We know that the ministerial meeting will take place in October, so there is still time, hopefully, also to work with the leaders to raise awareness, but what would be your expectations at C7 in light of the Leaders Summit in June?
Thanks a lot for this question, Daniele. We will have exactly the Civil 7 Summit on the 14th and 15th of May in the FAO headquarters, which is, just not a logistical choice, but also a clear connection and partnership with the FAO as well, together with some other UN agencies, exactly to reaffirm once again the role of the G7 in soliciting and building consensus to move the agenda forward through the multilateral system. And this is, I'd say, the first request we will share and we will address to the G7 Italian Sherpa exactly in the first phase of the summit, when we will deliver all of our recommendations through our final communiqué, collecting the different perspectives of the different working groups. So we established 7 working groups tackling the different policies and the different aspects in the agenda for civil society and also in the G7 agenda. So I mentioned already food justice and food systems transformation, but also climate justice, economic justice, global health, human mobility, principled humanitarian assistance, and peace, and common security and nuclear disarmament. These are the main topic, and also the main working groups are working exactly in defining the recommendations. And once again, just to flag and echo what some other people mentioned already, responsibility and accountability, I'd say, are the 2 main elements and fil rouge in all of our recommendations. So the responsibility for the G7 to move, to solicit a global perspective and a global engagement, and also to make real and concrete their commitments, as already mentioned. And accountability, once again, as coming to data, is a priority, especially if we would like to reach and achieve the SDGs in 2030. Just to give you an input and data, the investment gap across all SDG sectors has increased from $2.3 trillion in 2015 to more than $4 trillion per year today. So it means that we don't have national plans, for instance, for accountability for SDGs, national plans. We don't have mandatory national plans. Once again, it's something just voluntary. So it could be, and it is also, a recommendation to make accountability at the core of the policy action. And it's also a request we do for investment in general. Marco Ricci mentioned PGII, which is, of course, in the development agenda key, as well as for Italy, Mattei's plan, as well as for Europe at Global Gateway. So these different perspectives need to be assessed with a clear system which clarify and make real accountability from the different investors, and also a clear assessment of the impact towards people. And I would like just to end by saying that we need to put at the center of the dialogue people, and especially people in need, if we would like to reach a sustainable development. This is a clear and vocal call we will do, and we are doing towards, and we are addressing towards the G7 and the other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. My last question to Helge and Axel is, so data are extremely important, but as Paolo said, we also need to translate them in a way that is digestible for the public, because otherwise we'll still see that despite of the huge efforts made in the last years to raise the awareness on the SDGs, the level of support is still low or is decreasing. So how can we make data and technical information that we collect as think tanks or research organizations more digestible to the public in order to increase the level of support and the knowledge of the SDGs? Helge first, and then Axel, please, a couple of minutes maximum each, because then I want to give the floor to Ettore for some concluding remarks.
Thank you. Yes, that's indeed a very good and important question. First of all, I think there is, on development cooperation in Germany, there is a lot of evidence. There's a quite proper evaluation system on German development cooperation. But yeah, the question is, how can that be translated to the population? I talked about this legitimacy crisis earlier. Maybe one positive fact that came out of is that development actors in Germany are now playing even more on transparency. I think that's a very important point. So the ministry, the GIZ, our development bank, they all implemented some transparency FAQ pages after these debates about wasting taxpayer monies on development came up, which I think is a good and important step. But of course, that's probably still not enough. One implication or one finding that we got out of our SDG report or SDG policy brief, it's again about consistency, right? So in German policy making or German policy communication, I think the SDGs are not really consistently used, right? So while every policy area in Germany basically somehow affects SDGs or the fulfillment of the SDGs, I have the feeling they're not really used in communication of different policies. So there are talks, of course, there are talks about we have to protect the climate, we have to reduce poverty, we have to work for equality, but they are not really linked or related to the SDGs. And I think that's probably one big problem why the SDGs are still not very known. I mean, people know about these problems and what we have to do about them, but they don't have the connection to the concept of the SDGs. Yeah, one more point about the question on evidence. I think there is some research, and one of my colleagues is at the moment working on a study looking at whether it actually makes a difference if people know about evidence on development cooperation with certain countries. So it's not yet out, so I don't really know the results yet, but I think that's something very important to also have in mind or to research whether it makes actually a difference. So if there were already like evaluations or evidence on those bicycle lanes in Peru or the giant trains in China, would have make a difference? And I'm not really sure about that. So that's a big issue and a big question. If we have this evidence, how can we actually translate it that the people use it in their in the forming of their opinions? Yeah, I think I'll leave it with that and give over to Axel.
Okay, then I'll pick up here on this question. How can we ensure that data is more digestible? I think looking at think tanks like IDOS, like EIE or DEVA or others, or ADBI, I think the challenge is to become more agile, right? I mean, we tend to be researchers, first of all, but that's not enough, right? We are also policy advisors to governments, often also to parliaments, but we also have to become better in communicating. So that's here we need to strengthen our capacities in our communications departments, use data visualization tools, be more agile in terms of conducting interviews, writing op-eds in order to explain the evidence, where the evidence is, where we lack evidence. So in order to influence the public debate on development cooperation. And if I may, one last point that I would like to stress also, I mean, we have discussed a lot about effectiveness of development cooperation today. We have discussed a lot about solidarity, the awareness of development cooperation. What I would like to put also on the table, and I realize that's perhaps a little bit late, are the interests of our countries in terms of, with a view to this changing geopolitical environment in which we are living, with wars, with trade wars, with discussions about decoupling and what have you. I would like to stress, and that's perhaps a message that we need to communicate more strongly in our environments, are the interests. So what are our interests as, for example, as Germany, as a very export-oriented economy? What is the value of development cooperation in that sense? I'm not thinking about, you know, the arguments, you know, we need to promote German businesses. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is to realize that if development cooperation provides a very specific tool set that creates lasting international cooperation, lasting international partnerships with countries all over the world, in particular in the region that we tend to call Global South, and which is very complementary to security, to foreign policy tools. So that's, I guess, something that we need to stress more strongly, in particular in a more complicated domestic environment where it's increasingly difficult to justify development cooperation on the basis of effectiveness or solidarity. I think we also need to stress a little bit more about what kind of interests do we want to pursue in order to build the cooperative world order that we need in order to function as economies, in order to also respond to challenges like when we realize that many countries of the Global South are not on our side when it comes to punishing Russia in the context of the UN when after the war. So we need to talk about interests a little bit more.
Thank you, Axel. Really happy to, having shared this and moderated this panel, I wanted to give a round of applause to our speakers in the room and online. Very insightful presentation. Before giving the floor to Ettore, I just want to thank those people who made this possible. So our colleagues from Focus 2030, Valentina, Francesca, Fabrice, who is online, our colleagues from IAI, Ettore, Ferdinando, Elisabetta, Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, and also all the people that in these 2 years we have engaged in this partnership and this project. IAI has served as a platform to bring together policymakers, analysts, activists, decision makers, practitioners. I'm really grateful that we are working together on this project, and we hope we can organize a few more meetings in the future. There will be one last meeting at the end before summer on G7, where we will take stock of the declarations or the decisions made by the leaders. But Ettore, the floor is yours for a few concluding remarks.
Many thanks, Daniele. So I hope you will agree with me that this has been indeed a very rich and insightful debate, which has offered several inputs that we will certainly take into consideration in our future work. This, in particular, this program focus on development cooperation, ODA, especially in Italy, which I would like to underline again, which we have conducted, we continue to conduct with support
and the encouragement and cooperation of Focus 2030, and would like to add my thanks for their continued support and cooperation. For us, having the responsibility which the presidency of the G7 has given to us to coordinate the T7 engagement group activities, for us it was quite natural to create a synergy between this line of research and development cooperation and this type of very important role that we have with regard to the G7. And this meeting, of course, is a glaring example of this effort that we have undertaken and will continue in this year, even in the coming months. And second, let me also say that we are really interested also in establishing cooperation links and joint events with other engagement groups, including, of course, C7. And I would like to thank Valeria and her group for their extremely valuable help and cooperation in organizing this group. This is an effort that, again, we will try to further in the coming months, because it's very important that the engagement groups conduct dialogue with them and also between them, and also conduct joint activities. Let me just, of course, it would be an exercise of futility to try to summarize what has emerged from this rich debate, but just let me say a couple of words on the current and future direction of our work. We have within this project essentially two lines of research. One relates, as you have seen, to the study of public attitudes towards development policies. And as you have seen also from this meeting, this is not an easy exercise, because we have also discussed the fact that these public views and attitudes are indeed ambivalent, largely, and need to be interpreted. So we need to always try to add new and innovative instruments of interpretation. There should always be an effort to unpack and look into them more deeply. And this is why we have added this year a new research instrument, the focus groups, whose results, I think, personally, are very interesting. And this is why we are also thinking of organizing an ad hoc meeting with experts and stakeholders to present and discuss specifically the results of the focus group. In this regard, let me emphasize the importance that we attach to the cooperation with the research group of Professor Isernia of the University of Siena, which has been a very productive cooperation. Needless to say, of course, it is a key point for us, strategically discussing this issue. The presentation of this discussion of data on public attitudes very often offer an additional valuable opportunity to conduct a dialogue with decision makers and members of parliament. So each year we will have at least one meeting which will also involve not only experts, as in this case, or stakeholders, but also politicians. In Italy, for instance, it's very important to do that ahead of the parliamentary discussion and decision concerning the budgetary law. The other new instrument of research that we have added this year is as you have seen, is the comparison with the data concerning other countries. We think that this type of international comparison is extremely important to understand and examine the specificity and peculiar aspects of the attitudes of Italy's public opinion. And I very much hope that we will be able also in the future to even further our cooperation with the group of coordinated by the University College of London, with support of Focus 2030. I think this international dimension is very important to advance our program. The other, no less important line of research of our program relates to specific issues which are part of the global development agenda. In the last couple of years, we have focused in particular on such key problems as food security and global health, for example. And these are two fields to which the Italian government, as you know, has made a substantial contribution in the last few years. This week, on Wednesday, we will have a meeting on malaria eradication, which is part of this line of research on global health. And of course, all of you are invited to join us for that meeting. Minister Ricci provided us with important information about the priorities of the Italian presidency, including particularly food security and infrastructure, which are indeed crucial focal points of the G7. But we need to emphasize that the G7 has a special responsibility for emphasizing and strengthening the functional links between the different components of the development agenda. So the emphasis placed by the Italian presidency on some nexuses, including particularly that between food security and climate, should certainly be welcome. The other key fundamental task of the G7 is to promote cooperation and synergies between the various actors, mechanisms and programs aimed at advancing the global development agenda. This is part of a wider responsibility that the G7 has to making global governance more efficient, more effective. This is another point that Marco Ricci has underlined. As you know, the Italian government is now attaching great importance to its so-called Mattei plan. It is essential, we would like to emphasize this point, that it clarifies the link between this plan and other international initiatives. This is an important task for the government, as also Minister Ricci has recognized. This applies in particular, just to cite one of the most telling examples, to the infrastructure field, which is central in the Mattei plan. It will be crucial to develop functional synergies with initiatives undertaken by the G7 in this sector, but also, of course, the EU's global gateway. We have already discussed the structure and prospect of the Mattei plan in an ad hoc meeting some weeks ago, and will be important to have other occasions to discuss with experts and stakeholders how this plan will be developed, and this should be done periodically. This is why we are now planning to have a follow-up meeting in the fall. There is an interest also, as you know, from the international audience and international experts to see what actually came out of this effort by the Italian government. Last but not least, we cannot help, and this is probably shared by many stakeholders and experts in the field, we cannot help expressing our concern about the new data concerning Italy's ODA coming out from the OECD. It would be unfortunate if this trend is confirmed in a moment where Italy is not only has the special responsibility for the G7, but also has committed to contributing to advancing dialogue and cooperation, so-called outreach, with low and middle-income countries, especially in Africa. I would say in this regard that one of our main commitments will be in the coming months to foster public discussion of Italy's international ODA commitment to see if it's possible to reverse this unfortunate trend, and this is indeed one of the central objectives of the project that we are conducting with support of Focus 2030. So thank you all again for accepting our invitation, especially our panelists, and I hope we will have, I'm sure we will have a future opportunity to further this dialogue.